Welcome to Seeking the Lost with Earl Barnett. This program is sponsored by some area churches of Christ and is dedicated to spreading the everlasting gospel as revealed in the Holy Scriptures. The churches of Christ accept the Scriptures as totally inspired of God and the all-sufficient guide for faith and practice. Therefore, they reject all doctrines of men and rely totally on the Bible to direct their course in serving God. It is our pledge to you that each lesson will be the truth as revealed in His holy word. Mr. Barnett carefully prepares the graphics so you can clearly see the book, chapter, and verse of each lesson taught. We urge you to either copy the scriptures used or record this program for further study. If you have any questions or comments, or if you need prayer, the Seeking the Lost ministry can be reached toll-free at 1-800-390-7734. It is our prayer that Seeking the Lost will be an important source of information about God's Word and will help you more perfectly worship Him. And now, here is Mr. Barnett.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for tuning in to the Seeking the Lost broadcast. You know, I have been asked many times about God and about the hardening of Pharaoh's heart. Did he just gang up on him and picked him out and hardened his heart so that he could bring all of those plagues upon Egypt? It's going to be an interesting study, isn't it? So why did God harden Pharaoh's heart? And was it fair to Pharaoh? And another question that come to mind, does he harden our hearts today? You might like to know the answer to that question. You remember that he brought all those plagues upon Egypt. The plague number one is he turned the Nile to blood. I want you to notice, we're going to study this quickly because this is how that he dealt with Pharaoh, that each time that he brought one of these miracles upon Pharaoh and upon Egypt, it was a knockdown on one of their gods. So I want you to keep this in mind, that the miracles or the plagues that was brought upon Egypt was for both nations. You know, the Egyptians needed to realize that there is a God in heaven, and not any of those gods that they worshiped were real. And so we'll think about that as we go along. But the Nile was turned to blood. You know what? The Nile was somewhat of a god itself, because the yearly flooding, the inundation of the Nile, it brought the fertile silt down and fertilized their crops, overflowed them, and it left this fertile soil that made their crops grow and made them very prosperous. By this you shall know that I am the Lord. Behold, I will strike the waters which are in the river with the rod that is in my hand, and they shall be turned into blood. And the fish that are in the river shall die. Now that was really a blow, because at least 4 Egyptian gods were discredited by this plague. Don't you know that many of the Egyptians said, well, you'll never get away with that because our gods will take care of it. There is a person, our God rather, that we refer to as Happy or Hoppy. Well, just think about it. He was responsible for watering the meadows and bringing the dew. But most importantly, he brought the fertile inundation, you know, the Nile flooding each year, bringing the silt and the moisture for the Egyptian crops. Well, you'll have to go by Hoppy because he's going to take care of that. You can't turn the water to blood. What about this? There was come. He guarded the first cataract, the guardian of the source of the Nile. He made sure that the right amount of silt was released into the water during the inundation. Why wasn't the guardian on the job? Because he failed to do it. And then there was the goddess Hermethet. She was supposed to take care of the fish, but the fish are going to die. Don't you see how that this was a demonstration to the Egyptians? Her name means she who is in front of the fishes. She was the protector of everything with fins. But because the river was turned to blood and because the fish died, another Egyptian god was disgraced. So this is how that God brought these plagues upon them, and the reason that we'll soon learn. But this is how that he hardened Pharaoh's heart. Here was the protector of fresh water, the goddess of the Nile. She was supposed to keep the water pure and fresh. Well, what do you know? It's pure and fresh, but it's not pure and fresh. Rather, it's turned to blood. She is not on her job. She is powerless to do her job. The plagues were for the Egyptian people as well as for the people of God. Plague number 2, here comes the frogs. Now I'm telling you, the river shall bring forth frogs abundantly. I don't know about you, but this would be very loathsome because he said it's going to get, they're going to get in your house, they're going to get in your bedroom, they're going to get in your bed. They're going to get into your servant's house, all the people. You open your oven door, they're going to be in there. They're going to be in your kneading bowls. They're going to be everywhere. And listen to this, because the frog was a symbol of the Egyptian god He, it was a capital crime to kill one. Just think about frogs everywhere. You step on one and kill it, that was punishable by death. The Egyptians could pray or offer sacrifices to their God, but he could not answer. Don't you suppose they did? Don't you suppose they prayed to their God, the Egyptian god of the frog? Remove these frogs. Didn't do any good. They were powerless. And then here comes the lice. The scriptures say that the Lord told him to stretch out his rod and smite the dust of the land, that it may become lice. Just think about lice, that everybody is lousy. You know, I used to teach school, and every once in a while we'd have to have a lice check, because lice can get into schools and spread from student to student. But the dust of the land, that people were lousy throughout all of Egypt. Well, what about Geb? He was the earth god. Where is he? Why is he not on the job? Why didn't Geb control the dust of the earth if he is the earth god? Prevent Moses from turning it into lice. Another god goes down. Here comes the flies. You know, we usually think about those table flies. I think about these flies as being like a deer fly that we have that gets on cattle and horses during the summer, that when they get on you, they bite, and they're very uncomfortable. But he said, I'm going to send the flies on you. We find that they had a god for that. Here's keeper. Symbol was a beetle. To the Egyptian, it's clearly demonstrated that the god of the beetle, of the insect, is powerless, control the swarms. What are we talking about? We're talking about how that he hardened Pharaoh's heart. Every time one of these things had happened, what would Pharaoh do? Oh, he said, come in, we're going to let you go, everything's going to be all right. As soon as they lifted the plague, what would he do? We'll talk about it later, but what he did, of course, was turn and do just the opposite. And then, of course, plague number 5. Plague number 5, the hand of the Lord will be on your cattle. You know, the cattle are going to die. Cattle were a sacred thing, too. He said there's going to be a very severe pestilence. Now, this is a very important plague that's coming upon them. As long as the Apis bull was well, it was considered that all the livestock in the country was well. You see, they worshiped this bull. They actually put him up and treated him with royalty. When one of them would die, they would give it a royal burial. The Egyptians' animals were dying, but you know what? The Lord made a difference between the livestock of the Israelites and those of the Egyptians. So nothing shall die of all that belongs to the children of Israel. Don't you believe? Don't you think that the Egyptian people would see that and they say, what about that? That their God makes a distinction between their cattle and our cattle. And then again, he brings another plague upon them, and that is the plague of the boils. And the Lord said unto Moses and to Aaron, take the handfuls of the ashes of the furnace, A little story behind the ashes of the furnace. See, this is where the priests were. The priests, of course, that they kept their heads shaved lest any lice would get on them. And they kept themselves very clean, and they couldn't go before their altars if they had any kind of a boil or anything of that sort. And so this is a very important thing, because the ashes from those furnaces where they made their sacrifices was supposed to be sacred. And it was supposed to have healing power. God said, you take some handfuls of ashes from their furnaces and let Moses sprinkle it toward the heaven in the sight of Pharaoh. Got Pharaoh out there as an audience, said, I want you to look at this. Took some ashes from that furnace. It shall become small dust in all the land of Egypt. That's a miracle in itself, isn't it? And it shall be a boil breaking forth with blinds upon men and upon beasts throughout all the land of Egypt. Every one of them got sores all over them. But that thing that was supposed to heal, it turned in that it was a curse. You don't think that would impress those people, the Egyptian people? Well, you know, perhaps they would pray and say, we got a God to take care of that. Here she is, Sekhmet, goddess of healing. She was an ancient Egyptian goddess of war and destruction, plagues and healing. You know, the Egyptians were far advanced in their medical knowledge. And if you check them out, they were really good at many things. She is said to cause epidemics, and so cause epidemics. So if she causes them, maybe she can stop them. If she wasn't honored properly, she could cause epidemics. You suppose that many of the Egyptian people said, you know, we must have offended our God of healing. But they didn't mistake that it came from the Lord. But when she is properly honored, she can stop them as well. So don't you suppose that they prayed to this woman, goddess? They're not real, of course, but don't you think that many of them believe that, well, our goddess can, well, no, she can't do anything with this. Another false god, another disappointment in the gods that we have been worshiping. You see what I'm saying now? That these plagues, these miracles that came upon Egypt was for the benefit of the people of Egypt as well as for the people of Israel. Plague number 7, the hail. Behold, tomorrow I will cause it to rain a very grievous hail. You know, he would provoke the Lord to anger, no doubt. Pharaoh said, okay, I've had enough. We're going to let you go. Stop all this, and we're going to let you go. And as soon as the rain or the hail would stop, he'd repent and harden his heart again. I will cause it to rain a very grievous hail, such as hath not been in Egypt since the foundation thereof, even until now. You better get your cattle, and every man and beast which shall be found in the field. The hail shall come down upon them, and they shall die. Did you know that some of the Egyptians, they began to listen, and they began to do what was said. Others didn't pay any attention, and they lost what they had. At least 2 Egyptian gods were humiliated by this hailstorm. First of all, there was Tefnut. She was a goddess for rain and dew and moisture. And Nut was a sky goddess. Well, surely they're not going to allow this thing to happen. If there's to be hail or rain, then either Tefnut or the goddess of the sky, Nut, surely they're involved. They're going to stop all of this. Couldn't do it. So they're losing confidence, are they, about their gods? In our quest to understand the hardening of Pharaoh's heart, it's necessary to notice that after this particular event, that is, after the hail and the rain, look at Exodus 9. And when Pharaoh saw that the rain and the hail and the thunders were ceased, he sinned yet more and hardened his heart. he and his servants. You see, Pharaoh had a part in this too. He hardened his heart. He did it too. When it is said that God hardened his heart, we must remember that Pharaoh had a part in it, and his servants too, his advisors that were standing around. They too had a part in hardening Pharaoh's heart. Here comes the locust. Behold, tomorrow I will bring the locust to thy coast, and they shall cover the face of the earth, so that no one will be able to see the earth. In other words, when they flew, that they blocked out the sun. There were so many of them. They're going to eat the residue of what's left. They're going to eat your crops up, eat the leaves off your trees. You're going to be ruined. Well, let's see now. They had some gods they could depend on. What about Osiris? She was the god of death and vegetation. She's not going to let that happen. But you know, even though that she was the most widely worshipped god, she was a goddess throughout Egypt, she was powerless to help. Of course, we could have told them that. But you can believe that they would begin to pray to Osiris, the god of the dead and of vegetation. You're not going to let this happen. Surely you're not going to let this happen. They had an insect god that we've already noticed about. Surely you're not going to let this happen. They couldn't stop it. You see, God is demonstrating to them the foolishness of the worship of idols. Here comes the darkness. And the Lord said to Moses, stretch out. Well, you know, Pharaoh said, I'll let them go if you'll lift the plague. When they did, he changed his mind. He said, you stretch out your hand toward heaven, and there shall be darkness over the land of Egypt, except, he said, there will be light in the dwelling of my people. That's quite a feat, isn't it? That the children of Israel had light. But those people of Egypt, there was thick darkness in all the land, and it was darkness which may be felt. I spent approximately 11 years underground. And I remember one time that I was thinking about darkness that can be felt, and I got into a place where I was all alone and turned out my headlamp, and I tried to see if there was any way that I could make anything out of something directly before me. And I moved my finger until I could feel my eyelashes. And of course, there was no light there. You couldn't see anything. It was darkness so thick you could feel it almost. That's what these people had. They couldn't light couldn't light a candle. Nothing would work. But the people of Israel had it. Don't you think this was making an impression on these folks? Re was their solar god. You know, they believed that he got in his chariot and that he rode it across the sky each day. Really? Well, where is he? The chariot must have broke down. Well, whatever it is, he didn't ride. And then here is another god. You can see it facing both ways. Acre guarded the sunrise and the sunset. Well, what's wrong there? There are no gods. That's what's wrong. Again, here is the death of the firstborn. He finally told him, he said, okay, one more plague, he's going to let you go. There's going to be the death of the firstborn. You sprinkle blood over your doorposts and lintels of your houses, and I will pass over that house. But I'm going into the land of Egypt, and I'm going to destroy the firstborn. All the firstborn in the land of Egypt shall die. When they heard this, don't you suppose there was panic? There was panic in the minds of the Egyptians because everything that Moses had said had come true. Besides, they had a god, didn't they, that would take care of this? The goddess Isis. She was considered to be the protector of women, of mothers, and of children. Surely she can do something against this onslaught of all these plagues. Surely she can protect our children. But it was not to be so. And so we have the 10 plagues that came upon Egypt. and upon the stubbornness of Pharaoh and his decisions. So did God mistreat Pharaoh? Was God to blame for Pharaoh's sins? You know, it was a sin that he did not humble himself before God. Of course, I'm not ready to charge God with mistreating Pharaoh or anybody else, are you? But you know, many people get it in their mind and said, well, he should have let up on Pharaoh just a little bit. Well, he was making a point, and he was working with Pharaoh. And if you stop to think about it, that he was trying to show Pharaoh the true God and trying to get him to admit it, who was the true God. Look at this. There's nothing said of the eternal state of Pharaoh. This is where a lot of people get all mixed up. God did not harden his heart just so he could send him to hell in the judgment. There's nothing said about that, the finality of his destination in the judgment. It didn't say he was going to hell, that God tempted him and got him to do all this so he could justify sending him to hell. Didn't do that. What is obvious is that God used the stubbornness and rebellious character of Pharaoh to display his great power, both for the good of the Egyptians and the Israelites. That's what I've been saying all through the lesson. It's good for both nations to understand, because you see, the Egyptians needed to get away from worshiping of idols. And the Israelites, being in captivity all those years, it needed to be affirmed in their minds to have faith in the guidance of the Almighty, because they were soon going to need him as they were going to leave Egypt. Now consider this. The plagues were to benefit both nations. Why did he do it? Exodus, the 6th chapter said, I will be to you a God, and you shall know that I am the Lord your God. Each one of those plagues would come about. And he said, I'm doing this so you will know that I am the Lord your God. You have been living in Egyptian oppression all of these years. You have been enslaved. But now I'm going to set you free. And I'm going to set you free in such a way that you will know that I am the Lord your God. Not only that, but in the next chapter, he declares this, and the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord, when I stretch forth mine hand upon Egypt. The Egyptians are going to know where we stand. Isn't that important? That God is showing the Egyptians, you know, he must be the Lord. All of our gods are powerless. They must not be gods at all. They can't do anything. They can't do anything about the water. Can't do anything about the weather, the hailstorms, the death of our cattle. It is shown that the God of the Israelites is stronger than any of our gods. They have no power whatsoever. And that was an impression upon the Egyptians. And it should have been an impression upon Pharaoh. Look at this. How did God harden Pharaoh's heart? God hardened Pharaoh's heart by placing before him two seemingly unacceptable choices. Now I want you to notice that I said seemingly, because later on he made the choice. It wasn't impossible at all. It wasn't unacceptable at all. They decided it was time to get out of there, or let them go out. But what are those two almost insurmountable choices? Well, think about this. Choice number one was political. Oh, you don't think that they had politics in those days? Of course they did. How would it look to the Egyptian hierarchy to submit to the demands of an unknown God, especially since the prophet of that unknown God was a fugitive from Egypt many years ago, and that he had been living a shepherd life all of these years? Besides that, how is it going to look to our enemies that the enemies round about are watching Egypt and seeing what they're going to do with these demands made by a slave god, so to speak. Are they so weak that they're going to let them go? You know, Egypt was very powerful in those days. And so it was a political thing. How am I going to explain to my people that I have bowed down to a God that they know nothing about? And how am I going to explain it to my counselors? And how am I going to explain it to the world? And the second choice was economical. You know, it said that the Egyptian women were so delicate that the sole of their feet didn't touch the ground. They had somebody to do the work for them. Who's going to do the work now? It's economical. How could Pharaoh justify releasing the slave labor workforce? Who'd do the work? I think that would be a very important thought, don't you know? Who would do the work? So this choice here, how did he harden Pharaoh's heart? Well, you see that he had a choice that was intertwined with politics and the economy of the Egyptians. Think about it. Now then, after each plague, Pharaoh hardened his own heart. After each plague, Pharaoh and his servants had the opportunity to yield to the demands of God. They chose not to do so. And it wasn't because they couldn't do it, but rather they wouldn't do it. Notice this, that when Pharaoh saw that the rain and the hail and the thunders were ceased, he sinned yet more, hardened his heart, he and his servants. So you see what I'm talking about, that when we charge God with hardening Pharaoh's heart, we see there's a little more to it than just saying that God jumped on him and didn't give him a choice. Pharaoh humbled himself briefly at the end. So he brought them all in after the death of the firstborn. He said, you get out of here. How long will you refuse? He brought them in. He said, you take your flocks and your herds, as you have said, and be gone, and bless me also. Did you hear what Pharaoh said? Bless me also. How does the word of God affect you? Does it harden your heart? Just think about this, that the word of God will harden some people's heart. It will soften others. Ice will melt from the heat of the sun, but the same sun will harden concrete. What kind of heart do you have? What kind of heart do I have? Time is gone. This is Earl Barnett saying, you have a good day.
Our God is an awesome God.
You have been watching Seeking the Lost with Earl Barnett. If you need prayer or have comments or questions, feel free to call the Seeking the Lost Ministry at 1-800-390-7734. That's toll free, 1-800-390-7734.